Hello, everyone. Happy New Year, firstly. Some are saying it's just 2020 reboot. I disagree. It is an entirely new year. So happy 2021 to you. Welcome to our first Socrates webinar of the new year. We're joined by an awesome duo of folks today, and Doug Belkin and Anna Smith, who are doing amazing things in higher ed. Doug is a reporter with the Wall Street Journal. I'll ask him to introduce himself a little bit later, as well as Anna Smith, who is the Executive Director of Washington, D.C. Government's Workforce Investment Council. Let's start with Ms. Smith. Please, Anna, introduce yourself to the audience.
Sure. Thank you, Cordell. I'm glad to be here with Doug and all of you. My name is Anna Smith, and I serve as the Executive Director of the DC Workforce Investment Council. We're the state and local workforce board for the District of Columbia. And our role is to support the mayor and local officials in making decisions about how to support employers and job seekers in the region to ensure that employers have the talent pipelines that they need and our residents have opportunities to pathways to opportunities that will provide them family-sustaining wages and economic independence.
Thank you so much. And Anna is also a Socrates alum. We see her every summer in Aspen. So good to see you again, Anna. Doug, please introduce yourself to the audience.
Cordell, thanks very much for having me, Anna. Nice to see you as well. My name is Doug Belkin. I cover higher education at the Wall Street Journal. At the Journal, that means writing about the higher education as a sector of the economy, and then paying a lot of attention to the connection between education and the labor market.
Fantastic. Now, because many in our audience are emerging leaders, they inevitably want to understand your personal leadership story. So, Doug, while I have you here, could you just maybe talk a little about your life from a biographical standpoint, how you got to your current role, and why that you focus on higher education?
Sure. I've been a journalist for 20 years. I've been at the Wall Street Journal for 13 years. One of the reasons I enjoy this work is because you can look into a lot of different things. So since I've been at the Journal, I've covered the country of Canada, I've covered the US economy, I've covered a number of political campaigns and the region of the Midwest. I'm based in Chicago, Illinois. So that's what I've been doing now. I came up through a path that doesn't really exist that much anymore. I came up through a lot of small local weekly newspapers in New England, and then went down to Florida before going to the Boston Globe for a number of years, and then eventually coming to the Journal.
Great, thank you. And Anna, please, the same, your leadership story.
Sure. Well, I have found my way to workforce development through lots of different twists and turns. I began my career as an elementary school teacher in Miami-Dade County Public Schools, and through that have spent most of my career in education policy, recruitment, teacher diversity, spent some time under the Obama administration at the US Department of Education, working on our competitive and evidence-based grant making, and then have found myself in and out of local government a few times. This is now the third mayor I've had the privilege of working for in the District of Columbia, and between education policy, facilities issues, charter schools, to now higher education and workforce development, I've sort of seen a bunch of different areas, and I'm excited for the conversation today.
Great, fantastic. And before I start with our questions and discussion with our two panelists, I want to remind everyone to please submit your questions in the chat box. I will see them as they come up, and if it's germane to exactly what we're talking about, I will stop and ask the question then. Otherwise, after about 30 to 35 minutes of conversation, we'll go to your questions. So please send them now so you can get in the queue. So Doug, I reached out to you after reading an article that you wrote about the end of higher education last fall. I believe you were referencing some of the impact of not having students on campus to the finances of our higher education industry. And I just wonder if you can expound a bit upon that article and the reason why we started talking, and later bringing Anna into the conversation. What are you observing from your perch covering higher education for the Wall Street Journal?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So I'll step back a little bit and explain sort of my perspective on the beat and how it led to this story. So the United States has probably the best higher education system in the world. It just doesn't work for most people. So I've spent a lot of time looking very critically at the systemic problems in higher education and why it's failing so many people. So there are 5 themes that I just wanted to mention as quick as I can. The first one is that students, the center of every university, enshrined in almost everybody's mission statement, is this idea that you should learn to think for yourself. You should learn to think critically. That's what people go to college for, no matter what you're studying. And that's not happening at most schools. It's very hard to discern that. And one of the reasons it's hard to discern is the second thing that I would mention is that there's very little transparency in higher education, and there's not much accountability. So schools that have graduation rates of 5 and 6 and 7% are still getting tens of millions of dollars from the federal government to educate students, even though you can certainly argue that they're not doing a particularly good job at it. The last 2 things I would mention are that we're in probably the greatest time of technological flux since the industrial age, and universities have not done a particularly good job keeping up with those changes and preparing students for the labor market that they're going to face when they graduate. And that's a tremendous. That's why kids are going to school nowadays. So these failures, these problems, are what drew me to look at where things are going down the line. And the journal has this great section called "The Future of Everything," and it gives reporters like me a chance to sort of cast forward about where the direction of things. So I can go into a little bit about the story itself, but that's sort of those are the problems that brought me up to the point of writing this story.
Great, thank you. And Anna, you come at post-secondary success in general for the several thousands of students and young people that live in the confines of Washington, D.C. Just wonder, what is your perspective from your perch at the Workforce Investment Council on the future of higher ed as one option for post-secondary success?
Sure. Well, I'll echo Doug's point about accountability. And I think one of the things, and again, I represent and support a 34-member board appointed by the mayor that serves as our workforce board, most of whom are business leaders and owners themselves, employers, where accountability in higher education for outcomes that actually lead to economic well-being and employment for their students has not traditionally been a function that I would say many traditional four-year institutions have seen as core to their mission. And so that's one of the things from the employer side. They're saying that they are seeing more and more a disconnect between the value of a four-year degree, diploma, and what skills are actually needed for success in their organizations. And as a result, we see businesses that can't fill their vacancies. We see young people who, even with a four-year degree, coming out and pursuing boot camps and short-term credentialed opportunities through workforce training programs in order to be competitive for jobs that exist. And so I think that alignment is certainly something we're going to see continue to be focused on, and a lot of players in the sort of ed tech space, online institutions and credential granting organizations, I think are making some great innovations there.
Fantastic. Now, back to you, Doug. You stated earlier that even though the United States has one of the best, if not the best, higher education systems, it doesn't work for most people. Could you expand upon that a bit with a special focus towards minoritized students, not just ethnic minorities, but first generation students or students from low economic social backgrounds?
Sure. So if you step back and look at how the United States education system is organized, somewhere in the late 60s, early 70s, there was a real strong push to create a high school that prepared students for college. And this is it's called College for All. And it's a very aspirational idea, and it serves a lot of students very well, but it fails a lot of students. And if you're Black or brown or poor, it probably is more likely to fail you. So just to take a group of 10 students who are in ninth grade today, okay? They're all going to a high school that is aiming them for college. One of them will probably not graduate high school. Two of them will graduate high school and go right into the workforce or the military. So the sort of education they got, which didn't prepare them for something specifically, didn't serve them well. The remaining 7 will go to a university. 3 won't finish. 4 will graduate. They'll probably have significant debt. 2 of them will probably end up in jobs that don't use their degree. So you're going to have they're going to be very underemployed, and maybe they won't be able to pay back the loans very comfortably. And we're seeing this all over the place in the millennial generation. So two kids will end up graduating and getting a degree that they're able to apply in the market, and they'll do very well. And for those, it's great. It's a great system. For the other 8, it's really not a particularly good system. And as I mentioned before, if you're coming from a poor high school, a poor neighborhood, I mean, zip code is really destiny in this country. So it does not prepare you to take advantage of the opportunities, as well as wealthier schools, private schools. And as you know, a lot of this is because we've not funded state universities the way we did, a generation or 2 ago. So the prices have gone up and up and up.
So essentially what you're saying is, even before COVID, higher ed wasn't living up to its best self. Is that fair to say? Oh
yeah, this has been growing for. I got on the beat 7 years ago, and this is the first thing I started to write about. The first story we wrote about was administrative bloat, about how there's so many people who have been hired to not teach, but to run the university. There's just a lot of wasted university. So the issues have been piling up year after year after year. COVID has accelerated the pressure on schools because, and also the fact that the universities aren't offering a value to a lot of kids. Some of them now aren't going. And combine that with a real demographic cliff, just fewer kids going to schools. The pressure on universities with COVID is, I mean, this is a black swan event for a lot of schools.
Wow. So Anna, I would like you to talk about, from your vantage point, what options you're seeing available, or what strategies are you employing to deal with this issue that Doug speaks to, that of higher ed not working for a lot of students. I would assume that also is the case for DC residents. And so besides higher education, what are you all doing in DC?
Sure. So I want to also not lose the point you were talking about, thinking about particular groups of students, minorities, first generation, and others. I think one of the things that for us, the big focus on is through COVID, through this reimagining of what workforce training, preparedness, higher education look like, is inclusive job connection and inclusive growth as we recover, and what that actually looks like, because we have so many people who've been disconnected from work, and those that will be most advantaged or disadvantaged coming back in. And so when I think about a lot of efforts that are underway, I think of Opportunity at Work, their STARS framework, skilled through alternative routes, really helping employers battle back against a bias toward a 4-year degree, right? I think there's a lot of momentum there, because we know that often our students of color, students from underrepresented communities and identities are being held back by bias in hiring practices, et cetera, and not having access to a 4-year degree, cost prohibitive, et cetera, that their skills, the competencies that they may have, are undervalued. And so that's one of the things that we're really focusing on in DC, is ensuring that our K-12 high school graduates are getting opportunities for work-based learning, right? Through our work via CTE, career technical education efforts in the K-12 space, our community college, University of District of Columbia's community college and 4-year program, it's really looking at how are we providing a value proposition to our young people that not only prepares them for the jobs that do exist in our region, our community, and nationwide, but also builds upon the skills that they bring in and aligns with those competencies that we know employers are looking for. Whether those employers are putting those in job descriptions or not, I think that's also a separate part of the effort that has got to be employers brought along. And I would point to the U.S. Chamber's work in this space as well, trying to distill. Yes, I think degrees and learning lots of different subjects in a liberal education is important. And it's probably also not sufficient in the moment in time we're headed towards.
Yeah, and I know that DC is one of the few American cities that have launched apprenticeship programs, specifically with CityWorks and CareerWise, if memory serves correct. I wonder if you can speak to that pilot and how that's going.
Sure. So I've had the privilege of working with the team that has gotten this work underway. And, I will give credit to our European colleagues in Switzerland in particular, and looking at their youth apprenticeship model. Also colleagues in Sweden who have a real employer-driven job training, upskilling, approach to preparing people for the jobs that exist based on what those employers actually believe that they need. And so the Modern Youth Apprenticeship Program that we launched in partnership with, or that the City Works spearheaded, that DC Public Schools, our public charter schools, our local elected officials and others have supported, is really looking at how are we, really giving tangible hands-on opportunity while also enabling more opportunities for pathways for young people through an apprenticeship program. And so these are our students who are in their last couple years of high school. They are then sort of stair-stepping a portion of their time actually serving as an apprenticeship in a private sector company. We're starting really in sort of business services and IT. We know that those are areas of high demand and lots of vacancies in our region. And so it's a 3-year program. They will then spend some time and have an opportunity to pursue additional post-secondary education while they're also continuing their apprenticeship. So I think that is an innovative approach that CareerWise I know is supporting in Colorado and New York as well. But really it shouldn't be an either or. Of years past, right? It was tracking kids to college or just into a job. And the real thrust for us, our work is we want as many opportunities as possible, find the right fit and get the skills you need.
Great, thank you. Now, Doug, I want to start talking about the impact of COVID. So, just to set this up, you have an innovative city like DC, literally throwing an all-of-the-above approach to post-secondary success, thinking about it in the most expansive terms. It probably helps that DC has a comprehensive 4-year university and a community college in the same campus. That certainly helps. They have a lot more tools than most cities. But COVID comes and completely disrupts. So you said it's a black swan event. So what do you think is going to come out of this? And I know some of your articles have spoken to it, but for the audience that haven't read your Wall Street Journal articles, could you speak to what you think is coming, the future of higher education?
Yeah, sure. So a few things, just to retrack a little bit. The way higher education is organized, the way colleges and universities are organized right now is they're built for centuries. They're built for very slow, thoughtful decision-making that will stand the test of time. And that's worked well. What they're not is nimble or able to adapt particularly well. So they have this model of shared governance, which protects, it allows the university professors to help run the schools, which is great. That's where a lot of the the knowledge comes from and how the university should be run. They are probably not going to be as protected over the next decade or two. And we're starting to see now the firing of tenured professors, the getting rid of programs that have been undersubscribed. A lot of the very difficult decisions that universities have kicked down the road for years, maybe decades, they're having to make now. So there's a lot of pain in higher education right now. There's been somewhere around a couple 100,000 layoffs on college campuses. And that's happening because students are saying, wait, I'm going to pay $60,000, $50,000, $40,000 to sit in my dorm room and take an online class, to sit in my parents' house and take an online class. That's not a good value proposition. I'm not going to pay that. So there's a 16% decline in enrollment among freshmen going into this year and a 43% decline in new international students. That's a lot of money. That's billions of dollars that schools don't have. So the federal government will bail out some of these schools. Some of them they won't work. They're going to close, they're going to merge, they're going to be smaller, or they're going to look more like vocational schools for adults. We're seeing that in New England right now, where liberal arts schools are trying to bring aboard folks who didn't finish college and are struggling in the job market. One data point that I think is really instructive as to where we are now is that while we've seen this 16% decline in new students at 4-year universities, there's been almost a doubling of short-term credentials, mostly by adults, over COVID. People are running to get a 6-week, 8-week, 10-week, 12-week credential that will give them purchase in a job market that is changing so quickly. What they learned 10 years ago may not be relevant now. So universities are going to have to adapt to this as well. And it's happening. They are adapting. It's just painful and it's slow.
Hey, that's a pretty stark image if you're a higher education professional. Anna, you mentioned something that I think is really relevant here. You essentially talked about the lack of innovation as it comes to job descriptions written by employers. And I wonder what you are seeing. And I want you to respond to what Doug said as well, but what you are seeing, since you as the head of the Workforce Council are directly engaging employers, are they adjusting? What does that adjustment look like in this post-COVID world?
Sure. I will get to that, but I want to pull on Doug's point. I think he was talking about sort of which I think is a really important consideration for education institutions, for employers, is we're talking about a different type of population in our educational institutions, be it a four-year community college or a workforce training. These folks who may have been in the workforce and are coming back for additional skills, but in DC and nationwide, we know that women and women of color have been disproportionately impacted by COVID, right? This trauma to the workforce system, to the hospitality and health, travel and tourism industries, restaurants, food services, in particular, mean that those people who are disconnected from a job, many of those jobs may not come back fully. Our hotels are saying that they're probably not envisioning fully staffing up for another year, maybe. That those individuals are going to be, the prime candidates for reskilling, upskilling, shifting into educational opportunities that will allow them to move to more shock-resistant occupations and jobs. And so I think that's another thing that those educational institutions and organizations and even businesses that can be flexible in, who they're bringing on, how they're training folks and providing wraparound services for a population of people that this system wasn't really built for necessarily, will be a critical factor for who succeeds and who's remaining standing from some years from now. But sorry, you were asking before some other question, and I totally lost it.
Yeah, how employers are adjusting, specifically with the job descriptions.
Sure.
Are they adjusting? What are those adjustments?
So I think there's a couple things. One, right before, if we can recall, even pre-COVID, we had really tight labor markets nationwide, right? Our employers could not find people for a lot of their vacancies, particularly in technical, particularly in higher degree requirement opportunities. And so they were becoming, I think, a little bit more flexible, not necessarily in the descriptions and how they were articulating what they need, but in looking at how wide they cast their net. And I think this really gave an opening for some of the efforts like the STARS and looking at people who maybe don't have a particular degree or credential, but can demonstrate the competencies and skills, knowledge for a particular job. I think that is a part of it, certainly, is where are they looking? I think that employers now geographically are going to be looking more broadly and also thinking about more non-traditional candidates, right? There might be someone who spent some number of years in another sector, another industry, but has transferable skills. We know a lot of those hospitality sector folks have a lot of, customer service orientation. Those are the same skills needed in the healthcare sector for customer service representatives, in the IT sector for help desk jobs. And so I think there's going to be a movement toward looking at those transferable skills. And that's where government and support organizations, educational organizations, providing service to help people be able to translate that is going to be critical, right? Like if you've never had to think about what your job would look like or what you could do in another industry occupation, how do you prepare yourself to be competitive for those jobs? And I think that's a lot of the work that my colleagues in the Department of Employment Services and others across our system are focused on.
Yeah, it seems like we have this paradigm, and that paradigm essentially said, if you want access to greater opportunity, you have to get a college degree. But now that paradigm is changing rapidly with or without us. And so what's the message to young people, first generation, and their families going to college or seeking some post-secondary success is different from their parents? What exactly are we saying to the Zennials right now? Anna, I want you to take that one first.
I think it's knowledge, information, right? I think this is where I will say, I don't know that our K-12 system has fully prepared itself for those messages, right? Where I do think, college for all and the idea that not providing that as a pathway and opportunity, which is shortchanging our young people. I think the both and approach is definitely more of the orientation, more of my higher education or post-secondary and K-12 education colleagues are focused on is, yes, if college is the right choice, I want you to ensure that you're prepared. And there are other opportunities and pathways. Having access to that information, frankly, making those opportunities palatable to communities for so long to whom we were communicating, only college. I think there's a messaging, there's a buy-in from families, from important folks in young people's lives who will help them support their decisions, is going to be really important. And I don't know that we have yet, built out that robust information, marketing, communication, the channels, frankly, so that families know, hey, actually, let me support my young person to go participate in this apprenticeship. That's actually a better opportunity and fit for their skills and interests and what they want to do in their career.
Great. Doug, what about yourself? Just from your perspective and the vantage point you have, how does that paradigm shift?
So the decision that I mentioned earlier in the late 60s, where we decided that we would try to move everybody into college, we're rethinking that. Essentially, this is what's happening, and we're adopting more of a European system where we're going to build out a sort of a mid-tier system, an apprenticeship system. That's fine. That works. That gives good, solid, middle-class, middle-skilled jobs, and it's not a terminus. You can get a credential to code or to do anything, and then do that for a year or two, and then go back to school again, or go to school at night, or continue your education. We're going to be living into our 90s and hundreds. Like, education stopping at 22 is a very 19th century or 20th century idea. Mm-hmm. So how much of it you get, how much you can afford to get. People don't like to talk about the idea that, well, some people can afford college and some people can't. It's just the reality. If you go into big debt and you're 22 and you don't have a job that pays very well, it's a mistake. You're going to feel like it's a mistake. That can stay with you for a decade, So talk to people who have made that mistake and ask them, what would you do? The top of this story that sort of prompted this conversation was with people who got great educations and feel totally like they didn't get their money's worth because they have debt that they can't pay back. There's a lot of millennials who are having that frustration right now, and they feel like they listened to their elders and it did not serve them well. A little bit ranting, I suppose, but
well, I hear that sentiment, and I want you to put on your futurist cap for a borderline gotcha question. My count, I think it's about 4,400 higher education institutions in the United States. 18 months from now, assuming the trajectory that we're on was, probably another year and a half of us contending with COVID. So decreased on-campus presence of students. How many institutions do you think are going to survive?
So there's a guy named Clayton Christensen, who was a Harvard Business School professor, who mentioned that he predicted that first he said 50%, and then he said 25% of institutions would close within a decade or something. And he's a lot smarter than I am, and he was wrong. I don't know. The thing about these schools is that they have alumni bases that are willing to go to bat for them. So a school may not be a viable institution for a lot of reasons, but there's so much emotion wrapped up into these schools that they die very slowly. They evolve, and there's examples like that all over the place. I think there's going to be a lot of mergers. You're seeing it now. You're seeing it, but it's slow. And the accreditation that schools do have is worth a lot of money. So folks can buy or join that, and then they have access to federal aid. So they can sort of morph. So the answer is, I'll punt. I don't know. There'll be a bunch, but I wouldn't stab a number.
Well, I'll venture and say that I agree that mergers are absolutely going to happen much more. I think you know who Seth Andrew is. I know Anna does, coming from the education space, but his organization, Democracy Builders, just purchased a university in the New England area that was falling and failing. And I'm expecting great things from Seth Andrew and his team. And just a reminder to myself to reach out to see where they are with it. They just closed, I want to say last fall, they closed in that university. So folks that have been deep in the charter movement, that have built massive operations, in his case, Democracy Prep, are now moving to higher ed as the next frontier of education reform. So there are a lot of questions. And I apologize to the audience. I have to use my cell phone because My internet went out just as we were about to go live, so I'm on my phone. So if I'm looking in an odd direction, it's because I have to use my phone. So this first question is from Miss Galente, and it's to Doug. Doug, are you implying that higher education has to be more vocationally oriented to meet the needs of the new job market, or does it need to be more liberally oriented? I'm not sure what that last piece means, Fran, but I will pass it on. Doug?
Schools need to teach students to think critically and to think with rigor. That should be the end point. That should be the goal. Along the way, you should acquire marketable skills. Those two things should be hand in hand. And you don't have to go to a four-year school to get either of those things, but you can get them there, and they're great places to do it. There's a survey that comes out every year of freshmen, like 100,000 freshmen that a California school puts out. And they ask them, why are you going to school? And 92% or some number say, I'm going to school to get a good job. People, you're going to put $100,000, $200,000 on the line. You have to be able to pay it back. That's the reality. Wages have been stagnant in this country for a long time. It costs a lot of money to go to school. You better make it worth your while. So vocation counts, but learning to think clearly counts a lot too.
To that point, and this is to Anna, are you concerned at all that higher education, getting that credential from a four-year university, will become unattainable for all but the wealthy in this country?
Absolutely, of course. I mean, I think that's to the extent that a four-year degree continues to be the benchmark or a standard that employers sort of throw into their process for recruiting and hiring individuals. Absolutely, because that therein, we are exiting out of our pipelines whole swaths of talented individuals, many of whom we know may come from underrepresented communities and are Black and brown students. And so I think, yeah, absolutely. What I'm more excited about is the integration of those skills and employers helping to signal what they need so that from the entire pipeline, right? Pre-K on through, high school and into college, that we are actually thinking about what are the ways in which individuals can get those skills, not necessarily a technical credential. To Doug's point, I think it is those other competencies. I hate when people say soft skills, core skills, foundational skills, we want to say, but 9 times out of 10, the employers we talk to after a hiring opportunity or fair, they'll say, great, that person may have had the credential or a technical ability to do this job, but something was missing: communication, ability to engage with, colleagues, other types of skills that I think, as a country, we are doing ourselves a disservice, and our competitiveness on the global stage is concerning if we are not, really taking a critical look at, not just what credentials we're preparing people for, but all of the other things that we know will make someone successful in their lifetime.
Well, to that point, and this question is coming from, I believe, former Assistant Secretary of Veteran Affairs, Melissa Glenn, also a Socrates alum. She's asking, would using Bureau of Labor Statistics data and other data sets that are talking about employment opportunities, would that help, in your view, higher education institutions be more direct and transparent in goals for job and career alignment?
Yes, I think absolutely. And again, I think another point that was made earlier is the pace at which some of our institutions are able to adjust. So I will say, even working with our colleagues at the University of District of Columbia in this past year, they've launched an innovative cloud computing training program, are going to train well over 100 people, just in the next few months to get this credential. It's high demand. We know that there's a great need of it in the DC region. But what it takes for the training for those educators themselves to be able to provide that education opportunity to those young people is a challenge in of itself, right? In terms of not just the sort of pedagogical or content understanding, but all of the shifts of how does an institution approve a new set of courses? And this is definitely more in Doug's wheelhouse than mine, but if there is a new credential or training opportunity or course that an institution wants to provide, I think they're going to have to look closely at what barriers and talent they have or can attract or contract in to be able to actually even offer that.
Great, thank you. And Doug, I'm going to combine two questions here and employ some moderator privilege. Questions from two different people. Given the financial impact of COVID on higher ed, and what's likely to come from the Biden administration, which is some type of stimulus, because as you say, they have very powerful alumni associations and stakeholders that are powerful that are going to help them in this process as they learn. Do you think that they will change and say, wow, COVID is a permanent situation and this less people are coming to campus, we're going to cut administrative bloat? Or do you think they'll continue and do the same with the stimulus?
That's a tough question. The one thing that's been made very clear by this is that distance education, which has been growing year to year to year, has just obviously everybody's doing it. Look, we're doing it now. I mean, this is Zoom. That's here to stay in a much larger way. So people are going to dump a lot of money into building up the infrastructure because that's the new playing field. The fastest growing universities in the country are Western Governors University, Southern New Hampshire. They're online. And they're educating people that way, and they've done a really good job. So there's going to be more emphasis placed there because that's where the money is. That's where the students are. What COVID has also shown us is that it's not nearly as good in a lot of instances to have an education overline. You can do it. It's effective, but it's good. It's not great. So there's a huge thirst, I think, to return to school. And there's probably going to be a lot of money spent hardening universities to enable them to do that safely.
Great. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Anna, you're going to say something?
I was going to say, I think I'm keeping a close eye on what resources go to state and local governments. Right, we are all hurting because of the hundreds of millions, the billions of dollars in lost revenue and tax revenue in particular. Mm-hmm. Right, 14% of DC workers were working in hospitality and tourism, and the amount that we are seeking as a government to both provide services and operate with fewer resources. I think that's going to be an interesting thing to keep an eye on as state-funded universities have to be put in consideration for very tight budgets across the country.
Great. I'm just going to ask two more questions, and then I'll ask each of you all to give like a closing statement, if you will. One is on the shelf life of knowledge. And Anna, I know you are heavily engaged in retraining and reskilling adults. Well, what are your thoughts? What's the shelf life? How often should people be refreshing their skills?
I think constantly. I think one thing COVID is calling out, and you can't look to any of the social media platforms without seeing the folks who are using this moment to invest in themselves, and be it reading a book, be it going back to school for a degree or credential. I think that is something that people are going to have to people will be even more focused on doing, and ensuring that they have the skills that they need. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Great. And Doug, I have a different question for you. What are your thoughts on restructuring higher ed to reflect, say, the innovation hub approach of the University of North Carolina system? You think that's a viable strategy in this future world with less enrollment and more online education?
Yeah, it's happening now. California before COVID started, they created a fourth branch of their state education system. They have the university system, the state system, the community college system, and then they started an online system. That's going to roll out everywhere. And there'll be winners and losers. It's not going to work for most people. Most people will, there'll be winners and losers in this, but it's going to be more important as, there's huge benefits to it. The other thing is, if you can get a world-class professor teaching from some great university to teach you a class who's 5,000 miles away, why not access that? That's pretty cool. So I just think that will be continued to be stressed more so out of COVID. Yeah.
Well, as a parent of a middle schooler, I hope we all figure this out in the next 5 years when I have to start stroking those big checks. But thinking about the people that are stroking those checks right now, closing statements from both of you. We can go, whoever wants to go first. How about that?
I'm happy to. I mean, like I said, I've been covering this stuff for 7 years, and it's been this sort of build up of pressure, like against a dam that's slowly cracking. And I've been watching it and writing about the cracks and the fissures that have been showing up. This stuff that's happening is not from COVID. right now. We're seeing the accumulated inefficiencies of a system that has great power and has done amazing things, but does not serve enough people well. And so those inefficiencies and those problems are bursting through now. And there's going to be, I think, incredible shift. It's a very dynamic space. It's a great time to be in higher education, to be in education, period, because the opportunities are going to grow and grow and grow right now.
Great, thank you, Doug. And Doug, in addition to the Wall Street Journal, where can people find your writings?
They can find it at the Wall Street Journal.
Okay, in the Wall Street Journal. You don't have a blog?
I don't know.
Okay, great. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to read more about Doug and the future of higher ed, you got to subscribe to the Wall Street Journal. Anna, closing statement.
Nice plug there. I'll stick on that theme. Something that struck me pre-COVID, a statistic from the U.S. Chamber, about 40% of businesses that they had surveyed weren't able to take on new work and new business because they weren't able to fill critical talent roles. I think that is something that we're going to continue to have to keep an eye on, right? Not only is our educational system, our higher education institutions having to realign, adjust, be flexible for this moment, but as an economy, if we continue to have a misalignment between the jobs that exist and the businesses that are being created and growing and seeking talent and not having talent pipelines that they can consistently count on, I think that, I am concerned about how, we continue to support our nation's economy in an ever more competitive global marketplace of talent. And so I think K-12, higher education institutions, for-profit, nonprofit, workforce organizations are going to have to be really focused on how we don't go back to a normal, but really adjust and envision a different way of operating in the future.
Great, thank you so much, Anna. And where can we find your writings?
I'm doing the work. I am. I'm just trying to keep an agency going. Yes, come visit us and engage with the workforce system. More information about our work and the DC workforce system and for employers and residents in our region is at dcworks.dc.gov.
Great, and I commend all municipal workers in these very trying times, but especially in a nation's capital that has, in addition to national security issues, they're trying to run a city of 800,000 people. Doug, Anna, thank you all so much for joining me on this Thursday afternoon before inauguration. I know you all have a lot of things to do. We are so honored to have you all as part of the Socrates program today. Ladies and gentlemen that have listened, this recording will be available probably towards Friday, which is tomorrow. So Friday afternoon. We'll also have contact information and the websites of Doug and Anna, so you can follow up, and as well as any articles they want you all to hear about. So please stay tuned for our next episode. It'll be coming soon, probably next month. Also, please know that our winter seminars are the second weekend of February. They'll be digital. We have 3 amazing topics. Please go to Aspen Institute Socrates program to find us. Just Google us. We're the only one, and we'll see you online very soon. Thank you so much and have an amazing afternoon and weekend.
Thanks, Pradal.
Thank you.
Thank you all.